I fixed.
Hello and welcome to this meeting of the Housing Plan Working Group. This meeting is being conducted remotely by Zoom under the provisions that laid down by the governor's guidelines and regulations on remote meetings that started during the COVID era. So we want to make sure that, so for the benefit of anybody who's tuning in to observe our meeting, this meeting is, first of all, is not a public hearing, so it will not have public participation. It will be a meeting of all the members of the Housing Plan Working Group and our professional planning staff. But we want to make sure as we speak that we identify ourselves so the public is aware of who's speaking. If we do take any votes, they will be by roll call. So at this point, I will introduce all the members of the Housing Plan Working Group. The Housing Plan Working Group has co-chairs, and I am one, Jean McKnight, member of the Planning Board, and the other co-chair, and say here or present when I say your name, is Natasha Espada, who is also a member of our Planning Board. Helen Gregory is a member of our Council on Aging.
Here.
Rhonda Spector is a citizen at large.
Here.
Heidi Frail is a member of our Select Board.
Here.
Emily Cooper is also a citizen at large.
Here.
And so is Oscar Mertz, a citizen at large.
Here.
And Michael O'Brien is a member of our school committee.
Here.
And we may have, we have other members who may join in, and I'll introduce them as they come. That might be Ed Cosgrove of the Board of Health, Carol Fischetti of the Finance Committee. I understand that Marcus Nelson of the Select Board is not able to join us tonight. And not sure about Ed Scheidler of the Housing Authority. So the first item, I also want, of course, to introduce our staff. Lee Newman, our Planning Director.
Present.
Karen Sunarborg, our Community Housing Coordinator.
Here.
And Alexandra Klee, our Assistant Planner.
Present.
And I want to make special mention of a meeting that's been scheduled to which the Housing Plan Working Group is invited. And that is a meeting of our Select Board on October 11th, Tuesday, October 11th. And the time hasn't been set yet because we're not sure where we'll be on the Select Board's agenda. And the purpose is to present what we have to that point as a draft housing plan and get responses from the Select Board. Oh, and now Ed Cosgrove has joined us. Ed Cosgrove, our member from the Board of Health. Hello, Ed.
Hi, how are you?
Fine. So I just want to let all of you know about that. And when we have a time, an email will be sent letting you know the time for that present and then we'll work out who's going to make a presentation. So the first thing on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the July 28, 2022 working group meeting. I think there were a few comments that came by email about the minutes, but so I don't know if any change was made, Karen, or if what we should be proposing is, am I correct, or am I thinking of something else?
The comments I saw were yours, so.
Oh, okay, and those were just,
Today,
excuse me, I am confusing that with something else, I'm sorry. So yes, the minutes, Karen always does an excellent job of preparing the minutes, and any comments I have are very minor and were addressed. So do we accept the minutes, or somebody would please present a motion to accept the minutes of our July 28,
So
2022.
moved.
And a
So moved.
second?
Second.
Okay, so we had a motion, I think by Michael. Was it by you, Michael?
Someone got there before me. I
Ed
think it was
Cosgrove.
Ed or Helen.
I think I got there, but I don't know.
Ed
Not
Cosgrove.
positive.
Okay, Ed. It was Ed, and then Helen was seconded. So I'm going to go around for a roll call vote. Oscar Mertz,
Here.
aye or yes on accepting the minutes.
Here. Oh, aye. Yes. Sorry.
Natasha Espada,
Aye.
Helen Gregory,
Yes.
Rhonda Spector,
Yes.
Heidi Frail,
Yes.
Emily Cooper,
Yes.
Michael O'Brien,
Yes.
Ed Cosgrove.
Yes,
Yes. Okay, so we're set with that. And the next on our agenda is the discussion of the MBTA community guidelines. The guidelines, the final guidelines were issued on August 10th, and we got word of that on August 11th. I've reviewed them with Lee, reviewed them with the zoning subgroup, Oscar Mertz and Heidi Frail, with Katie King, the town's assistant, I think her title is assistant town manager. And Karen is preparing a presentation for the select board on the MBTA communities guidelines, which will be part of the October 11th.
Katie.
Hideous.
Katie prepared it. Okay, yeah, I should have remembered that. And I worked from that to just make a few tweaks to a PowerPoint. So if Alex would put up the PowerPoint, I'll use that to organize the presentation. And I kind of rehearsed, and it takes about 15 minutes. Is that too long, or is that okay?
it's okay, I think.
All right. So this is to implement multifamily zoning in MBTA communities. So second slide. And although this calls it regulations, they're not strictly speaking regulations. They're issued as guidelines. Next slide.
Is it
So-
not showing that I'm advancing it?
No, it's
No.
not.
Oh, boy. Okay, give me a second. Sorry about that.
I'll mention, Alex is putting them up, that the final guidelines present some opportunities. For example, it's our interpretation of the guidelines that you can have two different zoning districts, like you could have an apartment A1 district, and then adjacent to it, you could have a business district or an industrial district that allows multifamily housing by right. And you can count those two districts together as a contiguous area. So we expect at first, when we didn't have the guidelines, we were concerned that we had to have one district that was at least 25 acres, but now we think we can combine some districts, which is helpful. So the legislation is Chapter 358 of the Acts of 2020, which added a Section 3A to Chapter 40A, the Zoning Act. And it requires each MBTA community to have a zoning ordinance or bylaw that provides for at least one district of reasonable size, important word, reasonable size, in which multifamily housing is permitted as of right. The housing cannot have age restrictions and must be suitable for families with children. And the zoning must allow for at least 15 units per acre. The district must be within a half mile from a commuter rail station, subway station, ferry terminal, or bus station. For Needham, it's the commuter rail station that we're talking about. Non-compliant communities will be ineligible to receive state grants from 3 programs: Housing Choice Initiative, the Local Capital Projects Fund, and the Mass Works Infrastructure Program. Within the past 10 years, the town did receive about 1.6 million from the Mass Works Infrastructure Program. It's also said in the guidelines that certain agencies will take compliance with this law into account when they're deciding on discretionary grants to cities and towns. And it's the Mass Department of Housing and Community Development, DHCD, that's responsible for establishing the guidelines per the law, guidelines for implementation and determining if communities are compliant. Next slide. So as of right, first of all, multifamily housing is defined as a building with 3 or more residential dwelling units, or it could be a little duplex community with 2 or more buildings on the same lot with more than 1 residential dwelling unit in each building. And you can't require a special permit. Now, in Needham, we typically require special permits for any development of any scale. And certain types of developments always require special permits, but we can't do it here. However, site plan review is allowed. Now, we have site plan review in our zoning bylaw now, and is allowed to review certain items, such as including traffic flow, public safety concerns, and architectural design. But site plan review is not as strong a tool as special permit. It doesn't give the permit granting authority as much discretionary right to actually deny the project, but it can certainly impose conditions that affect the certain items in our site plan review criteria that we have in our bylaw. Next slide. And the minimum land area. The total minimum land area must be 50 acres. It's not 50 acres, all contiguous, all in one big block, but total of 50 acres. And that is actually 4% of the 1,223 developable acres within a quarter mile of the 4 commuter rail stations. At least we've got a lot of acres within our commuter rail stations as compared with other towns that are presented in the index to the guidelines. Now, here's the tricky thing to try to comply with. At least 25 acres of the district must be contiguous. As Oscar Mertz may be mentioning in our other agenda item regarding the recommendations of the zoning subcommittee, I think our largest existing district that actually complies right now with the guidelines is where the Petrini Apartments, Rosemary Lake Apartments are. And right next to that is Rosemary Ridge Condominium, and that totals 14 acres. But we have to find 11 more acres somewhere. But we do have opportunities to do that because we can talk about that later. So 25 acres we have to find contiguous. It can have a street going through it, it can have a public way going through it, but it has otherwise to be contiguous. And no portion of the district can be fewer than 5 contiguous acres. Fortunately, the one I just talked about, each parcel is more than 5. At least each district would be more than 5 contiguous acres. the whole concept is the district should be of a neighborhood scale, not a single development site on which the municipality is willing to permit a particular project. Okay, next slide. So a principle of the DHCD guidelines is that the MBTA communities benefit from having transit stations that should provide the opportunity for multifamily housing development around these assets. So the required unit capacity is the percentage of the total existing housing units in the municipality determined by the type of MBTA community. We're glad to see that, at least compared with the initial guidelines that characterized Needham as a bus service community and was going to require us to have, I think it was 20% of our housing units. They've actually eliminated the bus service category in their draft guidelines, and they've put us where we belong, and that is a commuter rail community. So 15% of our, we have to plan for is 15% of our existing housing units in the capacity in the community. So our town has 11,891 housing units. So our minimum unit capacity of 15% is 1,784 units. Now the state isn't requiring us to actually achieve that in terms of housing units. We have to zone for it and just wait for the developers to come. Next slide. So this is helpful in that the community can establish sub-districts with varying densities as long as the densities across the multifamily zoning district averages 15 units per acre. For example, we have our Needham Center overlay districts, and some allow 4-story buildings, some allow only 3-story buildings, but if you averaged across, you could meet the density requirement, presumably. So the density measurement, as I mentioned before, includes land occupied by public rights of way. And this is right out of the statute, but it's tricky to read some other words of the guidelines and make it fit within this sentence. That's the second bullet point. And any recreational, civic, commercial, and other non-residential uses. Wait a minute. So when you read the guidelines, it says when determining compliance, DHCD will not count certain excluded land, and excluded is a defined term, such as rivers, lakes, wetlands, privately owned land for education or institutional uses, such as a hospital, right? You can't zone the area of our hospital for this multifamily housing and have that count. A utility, museum, or private school, college, or university. I suppose, we've been thinking about the area around St. Joseph's Church because the church is already zoned apartment for multifamily apartments. What about the school? But I now realize, St. Joseph's School, I guess, would have a problem with that. And publicly owned land. And publicly owned land. I thought recreational, civic, commercial, and other that's okay, but publicly owned land, although land owned by a housing authority or lands that have been designated by the public owner for disposition and redevelopment, and there's a comma, a parenthesis there, but that's a mistake, it should say, or other publicly owned land may qualify. All right, may qualify if DHCD determines that such land is the location of obsolete structures or uses, or otherwise is suitable for conversion to multifamily housing and will be converted to or made available for multifamily housing within a reasonable period of time. So in the zoning subgroup, we've been kind of struggling. How can we get 25 acres? And we'd kind of gone up Rosemary Street uphill and said, well, let's include the library. But obviously we can't do that under this guideline. So the next slide. Now, suitable for families with children, as I mentioned, zoning cannot place age restrictions, can't limit the size or restrict size, number of bedrooms, size of bedrooms, or the number of occupants. So, you know, when we're considering the impact on our town of multifamily housing, for example, when we did a fiscal impact study for the Muzzy rezoning, which included multifamily housing, we said, well, there's only going to be one and two bedroom units, and the impact on our schools is going to be very minimal. Here, we can't say that. So there, you know, a developer could come in and have larger units. Next slide. So the location of the districts. So the amount of developable land, I said, we've got a lot of developable land. I think Needham has 1,223 acres of developable land within a half mile of a commuter rail station. So Needham is among the highest in this factor. 90% of our multifamily zoning district must be within a half mile of the commuter rail station. We're one of only 5 communities in the Mbta. And I noticed Boston is not listed. I guess Boston isn't subject to this law, but the communities that are at 90% like Needham are Newton, Cambridge, Beverly, and Brockton that have so much land within a half mile of their commuter rail station or other transit. And the 90% requirement applies to acreage and to unit capacity. So Needham's multifamily zoning district must include at least 50 acres and 45 acres, that's 90%, must be within a half a mile of a commuter rail station and have the potential for 1,606 units. Now, even though we have a bus line, that doesn't count. But when we're talking about like that 5%, how we could actually have 5% outside the area, I still want that 5% or that, excuse me, not 5%, 10%, 5 acres we can have outside the area. But they want to see that it is somewhat transit oriented, and we do have the Mbta bus line that we could consider. Next slide. You know, part of our housing plan working group that we've discussed, our goals for our plan have been to require affordable housing for all multifamily housing development. So even consider requiring affordable housing for single family subdivisions, for example. But here, there are no affordability requirements. Beyond that, if we want to have an affordability requirement, it can't exceed 10% of the units. And it can't require income eligibility below 80% of area median income. Now, there is an exception. It may exceed 10% if the affordability requirement applicable in the multifamily district predates the enactment of the law, or a community has an approved smart growth district under Chapter 40R. We don't have a smart growth district under Chapter 40R. Now, we have in several districts where we've rezoned to allow multifamily housing, we have set 12.5%. Now, maybe we can argue, well, we have 12.5%. Now, in these new areas we're creating to allow housing, we should be allowed 12.5%. We could argue that, but they may say, no, you can have that in the old areas, but not in the new areas. We'll see. Okay, next slide. Want to make clear, there's no housing production requirements. There's no goal like 5 years from now, we have to have produced this certain number of housing units. We just have to update the zoning. And the zoning district may be already built out. You know, as I said, we can rezone, well, we can just report the Petrini Apartments and Rosemary Ridge. They're already meet standard. Multifamily housing is allowed by right. It's 18 units per acre. There's no limit on the size of the units. There's no age restriction. Perfect. But it's already built out. Oh, that's okay. It's okay. It's based on the size of the parcel, and it's based on what would be allowed if that parcel were undeveloped. So it can be fully developed area. In maybe not in Needham, but in some communities, the capacity of existing water and wastewater infrastructure might be a real barrier to development. But DOCD will not factor it in when determining compliance. As long as you zone it, the water and sewer can come later. Now, the zoning district now here's something that really affects us. The zoning district can allow for mixed use development, but can't require it. So presently we have our Center Business District and Chestnut Street zoned to allow mixed use development with retail, restaurants, other kinds of commercial uses on the first floor and housing above. And as you may know, the only development we've had, well, we've actually had two, but we've only had one that goes up to 4 stories, and that's across from the Unitarian Church on Dedham Avenue. And the other one is on Oak Street that was recently built. And that's only I think it's 2.5 stories. It's sort of smaller development of the same concept, commercial above residences. Commercial below, residences above. But we can't count that unless we also allow standalone multifamily housing in that same district. So we'd have to decide, do we want standalone multifamily housing in our Center Business District right around the town hall? Is it okay on Chestnut Street? Because that's a more auto-oriented area. Those are the kinds of decisions we'll have to make under this rule. Also, we can't have boosted special energy efficiency standards for multifamily housing. We can have enhanced energy efficiency standards as long as they apply to all other kinds of development in our town. Okay, next slide.
Might it be over, Jean?
Oh, maybe it is. All right, DAC, that's other. Actually, there are a couple of more things that it presents some slides and a zoning analysis and next steps. But maybe it's time to stop and let people ask questions about it. And I'll try to answer the questions. I really have researched this, but there are some ambiguities in the law and in the guidelines, and I might not be able to answer the question at the present time. Are there any questions?
It looks like Ed Cosgrove has his hand up, Jean.
Yes, Ed.
I have a question about the old Avery building.
Yes.
It seems to me that would, since it's practically sitting right on the railroad station, that it would be a perfect place for multifamily housing. And you could get, I think, fairly significant number of units in that building. And especially if we allowed maybe addition of another floor.
Now, Avery, I'm thinking of the old school
The old
on
Carter,
Highland.
the old Carter factory.
Oh, the old Carter factory.
Hmm.
Oh, certainly. But of course, you're well aware that, what's being proposed now is assisted living, and it's limited to seniors, and that
I have
count.
I have some significant issues with what they're proposing.
Yeah,
Jean,
a lot of
who
us
owns the
do.
building? Who owns the building?
Well, I think a private company owns it. I'm not sure if the private company who owns it is the same company that's leading the way on the proposed development. Maybe Lee
was
can
my
answer that question.
Lee, yeah.
I'll get back to you on that. Let me look it up and I'll report back in a few minutes.
Yeah, but it's not the town, of course, that owns it. But there are opportunities, Ed, I'll mention a few, that are not zoned for apartment and yet are apartments. For example, the old school the old school on Highland Avenue, what's the name of that school?
Can't remember
Um,
either.
What?
I can't remember either. It's further up on Highland,
Yeah,
closer to the
Near the
new.
temple.
Yeah,
yeah, in that direction. Yeah, it's and they're across from Webster, what used to be known as Webster Green.
Oh, that's the old
that'll-
Avery School, isn't it?
The Avery, yes, the word Avery, and I popped into my head and I said, "Oh, that can't be right," because Ed was saying Avery. But you're right,
Yeah.
it's Avery Square, and it's also Avery,
Right.
condominium. We can just rezone that site for apartment 1, and we're all set.
Mhm.
And to add whatever acreage is there. It might not present the opportunity to have the 25 acres up there. We have to find
Mhm.
someplace we can have a total of 25 acres, but if we combine that with with what's already zoned apartment A1 across the street, we might get a significant acreage. Yeah,
Can I come back to Needham Junction? Would
yeah,
any of the Linden Street housing project fall into that district? So that
I
if
think
we-
it
if we
would.
built and we built multi-unit buildings in that area, would that satisfy some of this?
Ed, I think you're right. And of course, the housing authority is proposing to increase the number of housing units in that
Exactly.
area.
Exactly.
And it although it's not an easy walk to the train station
It's flat.
because but it is within a half mile. It meets the standard. That's another area. I don't know exactly what the acreage is of that, but it's a
Yeah.
possibility to rezone that
But
in
the-
such a way, at the standard that's required of 18 units per acre.
Right.
And of course, another site is the Stephen Palmer building that's just zoned for single family residence presently, but it's used for multifamily housing, and it's likely the town will want to continue to use it for that purpose after the current lease is up. There are a lot of opportunities really to find the district. The hardest thing is to find the 25 acres contiguous, but once we do that, meeting the 50 acres, I don't think it's going to be any problem at all for Needham.
Jean, I see Emily has her hand up also.
Yes, Emily.
Well, I originally raised my hand to ask about is it the Hartney Greymount spot that we've talked about in the past in town meeting, kind of behind Roach Brothers? But I also happen to know that Marcus Nelson is one of the attendees. I know he's a member. Is there any way we could bring him over?
Oh, please do. I
Yeah,
had the,
Dan, he had mentioned that he was going to be driving and he would be
Oh.
listening. So I didn't know if I should because I
Okay.
thought maybe he
Oh, that's
knew
I
what he
didn't
was
mean
doing.
to out
But
him, sorry.
no,
Maybe
that's
that's-
okay.
Maybe we should bring him over in
Let me
case
just
he
try.
stops.
He is
and
driving.
Wants to have a comment, you know?
yeah, he is driving.
I can
I know
try.
he- I
It's
know he
going to
wanted to
prompt
listen.
him, so he might not be able to do the prompt. So we'll just see.
okay. Well, I'm glad he's able to listen in. Of course, Marcus Nelson is a member of our select board.
Ed has another
Uh,
question, Jean.
yeah.
Ed, yeah.
Well, I just want to make some more comments about Chestnut Street. It seems to me that if the Linden Street property falls within the distance, then there's a lot of underutilized land along Chestnut Street and down some of those side streets off of Chestnut, between Chestnut and the railroad tracks, that could also fill in that and satisfy that.
That's a good
as a site
idea,
for
Ed.
multi units. I mean, there's a lot of just, the land is basically not efficiently used. In its
Chestnut
current
Street.
use. Yeah. off of
Now,
Chestnut.
between Chestnut Street, for example, I think the zoning subgroup is considering particularly the west side of Chestnut Street.
That's the probably the side I'm talking about, yeah.
Yeah. Both sides, Oscar is indicating that our proposal is for both sides. Yes, as a matter of fact, with the Chestnut Street overlay district, The Chestnut Street Business District, of course, is both sides of Chestnut
Right.
Street. But then you go, I really hadn't thought of it. You have the railroad right of way, which is a very important barrier. But if
It
DHCD says you can consider it contiguous, even though it's bisected by a railroad right of way, if you combine Chestnut Street area and you combine the housing authority area, you might get you 25 acres.
Right. And then the other thing is with that old Hartney Graymont space, my problem there, and I voted against the proposal at the time, is the access to Chestnut Street is so constricted that I consider it extremely dangerous for a lot of people coming out of that. But there may be a way to reconfigure all that.
Yeah, when that was proposed for rezoning, a difficulty with access was not emphasized by our public safety personnel. But later I heard, oh, there's access problems. So I'm not sure I fully understand what, I certainly understand that the site is not really suitable for commercial development for shoppers and stores because of the access and the visibility. Now, the apartment A1 district that I've spoke so much of as kind of a model of a district that would meet the guidelines is only 3 acres. It only allows, 3 stories. It only allows 3 stories. And I think a big objection to what was proposed previously for the Hartney Graymont site was they didn't like the 4 stories.
Yeah. But I mean, my big concern is you've got the railroad junction right there and bridges on both sides and this little narrow access to Chestnut Street from that site. And I just saw that as, people coming and going there, you're just asking for accidents. But there may be a way to reconfigure that.
Well, that's something to consider, Ed. We certainly think it's a good site for multifamily housing in general, if the access can be done satisfactorily. Michael O'Brien said hand up.
Thank you, Jean, for your presentation, and this was very informative. For our 4 commuter stations that we have, are there any that are already sort of not part of this picture of meeting the requirements of either acreage or the half-mile radius, so that they're sort of already out of contention for sort of having access to some of these, or all of them that there is adequate land and distance and so forth, that it could be at any 4 or perhaps even multiple?
The data that came that the state provided in an index just has total acreage, and it didn't provide us with a breakdown by station. Certainly, the state will be satisfied if we're within a half-mile of any of the stations. But for example, Hersey, has the large golf course right next to it, which I think might be considered excluded land. But I think as far as the half-mile, I think you just draw. One of the slides that we didn't get to showed big bubbles around every transit station. And I think those big bubbles around every transit station is what the DHCD took into account for Needham.
Okay, thank you.
Just to build on that, I think to your question, I think the analysis I did a back of the envelope test on some of the zoning proposals that we've done to just see where we are. So I would say, yes, Hersey is the hardest one because there's not a lot of zoning that's potentially changeable to multifamily, right? So but everything else in that whole Chestnut Highland corridor is essentially contiguous kind of urban environment that seems like a logical place that we can make those adjustments.
I think what the zoning subcommittee has done hasn't just, for example, taken great big single family area and say, okay, let's zone that for multifamily. No, we've looked at areas that are actually suitable for multifamily And many of them already developed for multifamily. But for future development that really are suitable. They are on major roads. They are within an easy walk to the train station. And that's what we focused on.
So Jean, from all the information and the things that they changed, what are the biggest hurdles or challenges of this to get this, if we want to get this approved for the town? I mean, what things would we have to, do you think would be difficult to do?
There's an ambiguity in the guidelines. For example, I keep talking about Rosemary Lake Apartments and Rosemary Ridge. Bisecting the large area, that 14-acre area, is a wetland. Rosemary Brook goes right through it. It's a large wetland area. There are, wildlife, there's wetland buffers, and that might be considered excluded area. And therefore, might not be 14 acres, it might be much less. But, I think developers, will use a higher density in a parcel like that. You simply use a higher density and put the development on the higher part of the land, and naturally you have to stay out of the wetland. Oscar has a comment on that issue.
Yeah, I think the thing that's tricky, and we've been battling the interpretations together amongst ourselves about how we read the text, and we have to get clarification from DHCD on when they talk about the average unit density at 15 units per acre. They then allow you to take away rights of way, civic space, public space, parks, non-residential projects. So, but when you calculate your average unit, when you calculate your units, you are using the land area that includes all these areas that you can't actually build on. Okay. So if you interpret this in a conservative way, one would have to say, if I have 40 acres and I include all my roads and all these parks and all this non-residential stuff, civic buildings and my buildable parcels, and I get 40 acres times 15, I get 600 units. So the zoning has to deliver 600 units. But if you're going to then take away X number of acres and you have 27 acres left to build on, you have to deliver the 600 units, but it's now divided over fewer acres. So the question I have, it's a back and forth, and I'm not sure I'm reading this, and I want to get clarification on that because I think other people may have a different interpretation, but that's my interpretation. So I think the one thing that we really need to know is when we're using apartment A1, which is an 18 unit per acre density, maximum density, 3 stories, will that pencil out if we start doing the real hard math and studying these sites and saying, okay, well, we can't really maybe we have to have a higher density allowable as part of our districts. And again, Jean said, not all the districts have to be the same, but when you analyze this to get the total number of units that you can get, we'll have to just test back and forth what we actually would need for density.
And today, the Department of Housing and Community Development had a webinar. Lee attended it, I attended it, maybe others here attended it. It was not useful at all in resolving some of these questions. And they did not have a question and answer period at the end so that we could pose our questions and get answers. They say they're going to have individual ability, you can send questions in and they will answer the questions. Well, that's where we are. There's also going to be the deadline they have set for themselves to produce this. I forget what they call it, but it's a framework, an application. You can put all your data in and get an answer on your proposal. And they're going to have that available November 1st. And maybe that will be a way of answering some questions. by testing out some sites with that format. Rhonda has a hand up.
So thank you for all of this. This is, I did read some of this afternoon, and I appreciate the presentation as well and the discussion. So this would allow, I know it doesn't actually allow 1,600 units, but I guess this whole group has been together for a very long time, and we've talked a lot about what our goals are for housing in Needham. And I'm just curious, my response to this is this doesn't necessarily match what we've all been talking about. This is allowing, as of right, potentially luxury housing with a limit of 10% affordability in the town. And I just thought, I was just curious if anyone else had that same response to it. It doesn't seem like, I love the idea that we're doing multifamily housing near transit stations, but there's nothing here that's going to say that these are not, $8,000 a month rentals.
Thank you for asking that, Rhonda, because I wrote down the same question, like, how does this fit into the housing plan working group mission?
Right. That's my, and I'm just wondering, because to me it doesn't. And I'm just curious about if anyone else is having the same response. And obviously Helen is.
Heidi, did you want to respond to comment on that, or
Yeah,
a related comment?
I think that I have to say that I disagree. I mean, I understand that part of the housing plan working group's mission is affordable housing, and I totally see where you're coming from on that score. This doesn't solve that problem, but it does provide for additional housing, which is part of the problem. So, I mean, I think we need to recognize that increasing the quantity and diversity of our housing needs to be part of the goal.
But
this is, and to be fair, the DHCD guidelines are not part of Needham's housing plan. And this is a separate thing that we have to take into account. And I think that to put them together and to view them through the same lens is just conflating them.
And I think what we'll attempt to do, and it's possible there will be people in our town, influential people even, who say, why should we bother? We've only gotten one of these grants over the past 10 years. Why should we do what the state says we should do? We'll just ignore it. But we can do this. And we can do other things that meet our particular goals for affordability and for new development. I think we can do both things. And we can do things our way. Like we were talking about our center business district. It maybe we don't want to allow standalone housing, multifamily housing in our center business district right along Great Plain Avenue and Highland Avenue, and right around our town hall. We want to stick with our storefront pattern of development. So we won't do it there. We don't need to do it there. I think there are other, we're going to find enough acreage that we can do this, and then we can have other zoning, which is exactly what we want. Further comment, Emily?
Yeah, I think Rhonda's point and then Heidi's point also gets to sort of the crux of when we started this work of sort of what the purpose of and what the definition of affordable was, right? So I see this, Rhonda, my first take is similar to yours because I'm in the housing world. I'm like, this isn't creating affordable housing. Because I look at it with a capital A, like affordable, meaning what I consider affordable using affordable housing resources, let's say, or meeting the 40B requirement. I think this group, though, started out pretty much sort of saying, to some extent, we're looking at everything. We're looking at anybody and whether or not they're spending 30% of their income on rent, whether they have $100,000, $20,000 or 200 or gazillion dollars. So, you know, I think to marry, you know, I think this issue brings that back to the forefront, which is kind of the purpose of this work group, I guess, is to look at a variety of increasing the variety of housing resources. Having said that, you know, I want to just note that we changed the zoning, which, you know, that doesn't mean we're creating more units, but if we change the zoning, if we are creating more units, that is also going to skew our you know, we should at the same time be doing affordable, deeply affordable housing so that doesn't skew our subsidized housing inventory. It also keeps us, you know, really pursuing both paths. You know, it's not one or the other. It's really, we're doing something for all people with all incomes.
Well, of course, we support our housing authority and their initiatives that they have now, which not only include renovating the existing units, but providing new, deeply affordable units. So that's one way of meeting that goal. I think we have two more hands. I don't know if I do want to get to people who have their hands raised. But at the same time, I want to move on to our next agenda item. But Rhonda's been waiting a while. Rhonda.
Yeah, I hear, Heidi, what you're saying. I think that this skews everything that's close to transit to high-end housing, because no one can come in and build. I mean, just take, for example, an MBTA station. The only way you can build on an MBTA station parking lot is if you replace the parking, which is extraordinarily expensive. And so by the time you're done, you need to build luxury housing in a town like Needham, if you're buying land in a town like Needham. And this group got together and said, we want more diversity. We want more, not necessarily affordable, subsidized affordable. We wanted to figure out a way to come up with more moderate housing. And I just feel like this is setting us up for people to come in with as of right and come in and just build what they want, which is going to make them the most money, which is how developers work. They're incentivized to make as much money as they can. And I just fear that this is going to further the things that we all as a group were concerned about. It's interesting because I know that it's meant to, I totally understand that the intent is to build more housing and to create more opportunity for people. I just worry that it feels like it might backfire in a place like Needham. That's all.
Well, when we come to the recommendations of the zoning subgroup and our final housing plan, I know we can, you know, we will focus on other opportunities, and maybe that will be the time to do that. But it doesn't absolutely preclude the requirement for affordable units. And 10% is not that different from the 12.5% that we have required and have expected to require in the future. It means, you know, if there are 10 units, there have to be 2 instead of 2 subsidized units. I mean, excuse me, of course, 1 subsidized unit rather than 1 subsidized unit for every 8, but it's still there. Okay. Shall we move on now to?
Jean, just so I can maybe answer.
Yes, what? Who?
Go ahead.
I was going to just go forward and answer the question on the ownership.
Oh, yeah.
So they have it in so many different names, but essentially it's Welltower owns the property through a trust. And Welltower and Belfar have come together to do the development and to serve as the landlord through an LLC. So that's the legal structure of how the
But
Carter
basically
building-
one of the people that are trying to one of the groups owns the building. So it's
One
not
of the
something
groups
where
owns the
there's a
building
different
through a trust.
landlord that could take offers from others. It's they're the ones that are deciding how to move forward with it.
Right.
And can I ask one quick, Emily, I see your hand up also. I have a quick question because this is something that I think is important because in my mind, there aren't a lot of great opportunities for that amount of housing to occur in Needham, right? So the lost opportunity of the project, the application being removed and reapplied is a disadvantage for what this group is trying to do. However, they're asking, I guess my question is, the zoning was changed for them a couple of years ago. We had to go to town meeting. So the fact that it's not going through in the way that it was approved for that, the zoning was for the project. Now that it's not happening, do we have to go back to town meeting and report anything? Or, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, are there any implications, or is it just, it was changed and it's changed forever and there's no
The zoning,
repercussion?
I think the issue is that the zoning as it was written, I mean, certainly there was a proposal that was made to the planning board, it was made to the town, and a representation in terms of how the property was going to be developed. And the zoning was written to facilitate that. But the zoning basically allowed for assisted living and independent living units by special permit, and did not on its face mandate that both had to be, part of a proposal. It was the same way the zoning was crafted at the time the Elder Services District was created and Wingate did its expansion. And the Wingate proposal was similar. They had a proposal, we wrote the zoning, it was structured the same way this zoning was structured for the Carter building. Wingate built what they represented they were going to build the town meeting, and there were no issues. I think in this case, one of the issues is that the zoning itself, allows for these two uses by special permit and doesn't mandate that they have to be both there, or that the independent units have to be part of the proposal. And so, they're entitled to request a special permit for a use. I think that's the issue.
There's no way that we could go back to them and say that, the town meeting approved this based on this, and now you're.
No, but you don't have to approve their special permit.
Correct.
Well, I think we need to be careful. We're holding public hearings on this, and we're supposed to be, in the conversation around this permit needs to be confined to those meetings.
I guess what comes down to this is that it feels like we're reactive on zoning, and we're not looking at it holistically to create zoning. And this is the opportunity to create zoning that has a kind of a larger mission for the entire town. And so I think, we just got burned from doing specific zoning for one particular site. And I think that's, it's not advantageous for the town to have to accommodate zoning per project. So.
Well, even though Emily has had her hand up, I want to welcome Marcus. And I know, Marcus, you have been in your car listening, and now you're here in person, or in Zoom window. So Marcus is a member of the Housing Plan Working Group and an elected member of our select board. Welcome, Marcus.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And sorry, just a late night today for sure.
Yes.
I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what Natasha said. And I think that is such a valid point as to, instead of being reactive to things on how they come in, having some kind of overarching plan that would give us a better sense of how we do this. And it's not going to be, it's not one size fits all, but if we get something that is a little bit more concrete, that can kind of help, oversee a majority of the projects and things we have, to make sure that we're really being intentional about the way that we allow permitting or things like that in areas that we're looking to. I think that'll make a difference as to when we think about the diversity stock, when we think about the number of houses, period. We are going to make it not just accessible for what was said earlier, for people that can really afford this, the affordability piece. But when we think about everyone, because like you said earlier, if we just have the people that can come in that can afford to mark up the price and build these expensive homes, and we increase our housing stock, what are we really doing? So that's something I just wanted to kind of say and really agree with, because if we're going to do this, then we got to do it for not just the people that can get in town and do what they need to do. But, you know, if we want to welcome more people in here from all different types of backgrounds and status, then we have to have some kind of theme that is and plan that's in place to do that from the get-go and not wait until we get a project and then wait until we get a project. So I think that's important for sure. Thank you all.
Yes, and then thank you now, Marcus and Emily.
Well, I know we've kind of been switching topics. I just wanted to loop back to the MBTA zoning for a second. I think I would feel more comfortable if we said, yes, we're going to embrace this and this sounds great. If we also committed to saying, you know, and we were going to have 10% of the units as affordable. If we also committed to saying that we would look at the true subsidized housing inventory percentage number, because what's going to happen is when we develop all of these units in the MBTA zone with only 10% affordable, but count the whole building, we're going to have like, oh, we're at 15%, we're at 17%, we're at 20%. Look how great Needham is. But when you start actually counting the actual affordable housing units, we will be way below that. So I want to make sure that we do things at the same time, right? We're going to do this, but no, have the foresight to see the impact is that we're actually going to drop probably in our subsidized housing inventory in reality. So we have to make sure to be boosting that up as well through all these other mechanisms. So I think I'd love to see a commitment of this group saying, we know the state counts, 10%, and this is how they do it, but we've recalculated, and that's how we're going to look at things, or we're going to request that people look at things moving forward and what we're going to strive for.
One thing I want to clarify, Emily, is that in the housing inventory, all of the units in a development will count toward the total number of units in the town. But it's not like 40B, where rental units that are being rented for $3,000 a month will count in the inventory. They will not. That's
so if you have a
only
100-unit building and under the MBTA, I'm sorry if I misunderstood, 100-unit building, 90 of them are not affordable, 10 of them are. They're only going to count the 10. They're not.
They're only going to count the 10.
Okay,
That's
I'm sorry,
right.
I didn't understand that.
Yeah, and all of the units will count toward the requirement that the town has.
Okay.
So
Apologize. My computer.
Oscar.
I do think that we should own the truth in the SHI. And I think that goes for everything that we're looking at. The one thought I had in response to your question about the MBTA, I think the greatest thing that we're getting out of the MBTA is that there's this loosening of the zoning, and you're worried that it's going to get taken advantage of. And I think what we really want to do is analyze where we actually think we're going to do what's required for the MBTA, meaning what's going to be acceptable as our baseline as of right. But on top of that, we could add incentives to give additional height if somebody was to do something like higher density units, affordable, greater percentage of affordability, workforce housing. So there are ways to do some incentive layers, as long as it's not impacting what's baseline acceptable for MBTA. That's one point. The other point is we just literally will be able to carve, once we do the math, what we think is going to be the MBTA guidelines and where we want to apply some additional incentives that may restrict MBTA or may not be counted by the MBTA, right? So we could put onto those more restrictions about a higher percentage of affordability, more aggressively marketing true different levels of AMI. And even other kinds of housing that we know we need for people with special needs. We're going to need to find lots of different kinds of housing, creative housing, beyond just what would come through an as of right process. So we just need to work back and forth with what we know we're going to have to deliver to meet MBTA requirements, but then on top of that, figure out how we can do other zoning that's going to help us again address these other issues that are critical.
So,
Mhm.
I have
Yes.
a question really quickly, Jean. So what are the next steps in the sense of, does this have to go to town meeting for the MBTA communities? Do we?
No, it doesn't. The next step is that the town is obliged to submit plan of how we're going to comply with the MBTA guidelines. And the deadline for that is relatively quick. Let's see, I think it's in one of these slides, but Lee, I think I'm correct in saying that is the end of this year,
January of
just-
2023, I think.
Yeah.
January 2023. So coming right up.
And
We're
who
supposed to
submits
sub-
this, Jean? It does, who does submits this? The planning board and the select board, who?
I
But
think
you
the
don't-
planning board and the select board will be meeting to decide what the response should be.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah, it doesn't require a town meeting vote, but of course, the rezonings do require a town meeting vote. So then the next deadline, here it is, next steps. Okay, timeline, here it is. The next step is December 31st, 2024.
okay.
So
So
that's
then
the end
when
of
that becomes-
2024.
That's
That's
when the
when,
changes to the zoning they need to occur by that point.
that's right. Mhm.
And I guess, I think what people are nervous about is this whole, as of right? And so I guess
Mhm.
understanding that it's still gonna be reviewed by design review board, right? I mean, there are still gonna be checks and balances to all of this. It's not like nilly-willy that they just submit and they just keep on going, right? I mean, I want to make sure,
Right.
because I think that people are very nervous about this as of right, and understanding that and kind of breaking that apart to tell people, this is still this is still the process that it needs to occur. And I think that would be really helpful, I think, for us to come with a plan that makes this, I mean, it's very complex, and just kind of finding a way of making it accessible to all who will have a lot of questions and be afraid of changing, of any changes.
And we may want to take a look at the section of our bylaw on site plan review and make sure we have adequate conditions in that section for
Correct.
multifamily housing.
And
the guidelines actually refer to the case law with regard to site plan approval, because it's not a creature of the state zoning act. It's something essentially towns have invented.
Mhm.
And so how far can you go in denying something or requiring a condition on something is a matter of case law.
And I think that this is a great opportunity for what we were just talking about, not being reactive, but actually having a true plan, and a true plan that has kind of a structure that's created by MBTA communities that also looks at the whole, our whole zoning holistically, and that it gives us permission to think about it and to bring the proposal to town meeting, with careful thought, following that structure. So I think this is the opportunity to be able to be effective, where we've been kind of doing it piecemeal.
Mhm. And I guess I'd just like to throw out a comment to kind of sum up the idea of by right housing. Scary. We should have special permits. The very development I live in, Rosemary Ridge, was developed in the 80s under Apartment A1 zoning, by right development, no special permit. Same thing with Petrini Apartments, same thing with Webster Green. We have had that kind of zoning in our town. It's produced some very nice places to live in our town. We can do it again.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Jean, should we go on to getting comments on?
Yes, it's time to move on our agenda, and that is the further discussion of subgroup priorities and strategies, and you're facilitating that, Ms. Shasha. And just for the zoning group, I think I sent an email. It will be Oscar is going to make a presentation on that for that group.
Oscar, why don't we start with you? And then we have the other two groups. Michael, do you want to present what we talked about, or do? Here.
I'm fine if you have it up already, Natasha, to lead that or
Okay.
whatever works for you. Yes.
And then Emily and Rhonda, your group, who will be presenting, or do you have any additional comments?
We sent our comments back a ways back.
Well, yeah, I have them here. Yeah.
And
it's-
and then we got a new version of the implementation table, so I was sort of assuming that they were incorporated into that. And then I personally just sent it to some new just on the new table, but we haven't met to talk about the new table versus the old table. So I'm not sure.
Right, so we based it on the old table also. And so I think that's where we are right now, and then we can, but I think maybe Oscar, why don't you start since and I think the goal, there are two goals here. One is to go through each subgroup and get the feedback for that. And then sorry, and then there's the additional piece. I'm looking here at the you know, for discussion right after. So okay, why don't we start with Oscar?
Hi, does everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess the one thing that we've been wondering, or I've been wondering, our subgroup has been wondering, was what's the maps are relatively detailed. There's lots of layers of discussion that could come from going through the map review. And we have done a meeting of our own subgroup to go through what you have all looked at as the current state of the maps. And we have gone through and made a couple of edits or suggestions about how we would make some changes. So I'm throwing the question, I guess, to everyone, given the time we'd like to spend on other things tonight. I think what I was going to do was go through the changes that we basically have on this list of the zoning changes. And then I do have something that I can share, which was a summary of what these zoning changes actually could produce in terms of the acreage and potential, total units. There's some subtleties to, as Jean said, whether these are going to be allow multifamily as opposed to in the downtown, where we're saying we might not want to allow multifamily standalone, which would then basically take those areas out. And I think there's some discussion still to go on some of these subtleties. So let me go through the list here. And this is, again, this is literally from this week. We went through the maps and we made some changes.
And
My
Oscar,
other
excuse
thought-
me 1 second, just really
Yeah.
quickly. It's 8:30, so I just want to make sure. It looks like you have 9 pages.
Oh, no, it's not 9 pages. It's just a couple.
Okay, sorry. I just want to make sure that we can get through them, and still talk to the other two groups, but just in
Yes, yes.
general. Okay.
Agreed. I will be fast. But again, what I'm actually wondering is, if people really want to go through the maps in more detail, would it be helpful to have another Zoom and have those who are interested in getting into it to jump on a Zoom and literally spend some time going through the maps, the pieces of all, and then talk about some of those areas in more detail.
I think that would be great. I think that would be great because I think some people are more interested than others in the specifics of it.
Yeah.
And I think you guys have gotten into the weeds and it would be really interesting. I would be interested in seeing it.
Yeah.
So I don't want to gloss over it at all. And I think that could be another meeting where those who are interested could attend.
Okay, so we'll just work through Alex and Lee and decide how we're going to set up another meeting and just call it the map review. So I'm just going to go through, I think one of the critical things that we discussed, sorry. Let me jump ahead here. We've already touched on the issue with inclusionary zoning and the stipulation with the MBTA guidelines that they're actually 10%. And also only at no lower than 80% AMI. So they're very mindful of trying to limit any kind of impact to the development potential. And so I think, as Rhonda and pointed out, I think we're concerned about that. So going through, again, this is a little bit arcane, but each one of these line items was a map change. So I'm going to just hit the ones that we wanted to change. So I'm not going to get into the details of all this, other than to say the one thing if anyone noticed, when we were rezoning the area, essentially from the Catholic Church down to 888, basically including Greensfield, we had proposed that whole area was going to become apartment A1. We assumed that we were just going to take over the Greensfield. And so I think people were concerned that that's going to be a bad message. So we're adapting the map so that the Greensfield does not get included in a new zoning district. It'll be in perpetuity, it'll be remain as Greensfield. The one thing that we were discussing about Garden Street, which currently has a limit, it's a slightly different overlay district. What we wanted to do there was to say, either we're going to change that to allow for standalone multifamily up to 3 stories, or we're going to rezone that to apartment A1. There was some debate that we've been having about whether we keep that zoning district as it is and just adjust it with apartment A1 dimensional requirements, or whether we literally change it to apartment A1. And so that's, again, trying to understand what we're doing around the downtown, and what that reacts to is where Gene was saying we're going to limit the standalone and not allow it on our major streets around Town Hall and on Great Plain. But when we're at that second layer out along Garden, it certainly would be appropriate to have housing that comes down to the ground. So we wanted to just allow that to happen. The next area was going north from the Heights. And this is more of a clarification, but what we've done with going north from the Heights is to take what was general residence and propose that we basically fill in a zone from the multifamily from Avery School and Hamilton Highlands to come down to Honeywell on both sides of the street, because there's some multifamily and some 2-family mixed in there. There's a couple of churches. And so the idea is that zone could become something that's a little bit more consistent and a little bit higher density, and it kind of blends in between what is currently up near Webster, just below Webster, and down to Honeywell as a zone that might have a little bit higher density. So that's a proposal. This was just a clarification on the map. And it also was to say, we're not going to include Avery Field. We're going to keep that as an open space, which is over on Webster on the backside of this new district, proposed district. So the next zone down is the basically our business, Hillside Avenue business and neighborhood business. And the one thing we wanted to do here, which is again a kind of a clarification of some of these districts, which are a little bit strange. For instance, the Sudbury Farm right below the library, there's a little zone of single residence that's a buffer against the library and basically on Rosemary, which we understand historically was done so that there would be no curb cuts out from that commercial zone out to Rosemary. So what we're basically saying is we would clean up or simplify the zoning and let that in the business district that includes Sudbury Farms move up to Rosemary, and that would allow the potential for that entire zone south of Rosemary to become multifamily housing if there's a future beyond Sudbury Farms. That site is just, it's a little cleaner from a zoning district point of view. The other thing that we wanted to do was to follow, again, we haven't really polled everybody to see what they think about this, but as an idea for the future of, we're really trying to lay the groundwork for what could happen down the road, and some churches are changing over, and some might be sold. So whatever the future is of some of these sites or all of these sites, we thought it might be better if we were consistent and said that a lot of these areas and a lot of these sites for temples or churches are also highly visible on intersections with major streets, and they could be easily adapted to a multifamily condition in the future, potentially. And so we're not trying to cast or place any ill will or in the zoning, but we're simply saying that we acknowledge that these particular sites could be the potential location for future multifamily. So that was an idea that we would actually add in some that we missed, which was Temple Beth Shalom and the Presbyterian Church at Central and Great Plain up by Newman. And there may be others, but this was just we were just catching those two that we didn't have before. And then we're getting into center business district and the overlays. And so this is a little, getting into the weeds, but what we're basically saying, and this is what Lee and Jean and Heidi and I have been discussing, where we're saying, are we going to allow standalone in our downtown areas or not? And we have currently said in this 4 section that we would allow in the business districts, center business, and in the overlays that we would allow multifamily, mixed use, by right, and also standalone. So what we're potentially saying here is to change that. And if that means they drop off the list of what we can count for MBTA, then that's the way it's going to be. And so these are saying that District A and District B, the overlays would not allow standalone. Then there's a subtlety about the Denmark Lane, which is a strange anomaly. And we're just saying that bears something more similar to apartment A, because that is standalone multifamily housing. So that would be more appropriate if that was rezoned as A1. So we're just changing the proposed zoning. And then that's it. So there was this other issue that like to poll everybody on, and that's when we talk about the ability to build residential over retail, the current A and B the overlay districts, B being south of Great Plain and A being north of Great Plain. The area north of Great Plain allows 2 stories over retail, and the area south allows 3 stories over retail. And there's some other areas that are slightly different as you move out to the west. It actually steps down on the other side of the tracks on the south side of Highland to be 3 stories, not allow only 2 over 1, not 3. And so the debate and the request, I guess, for input is to see if people would be opposed to adding a story that allows a setback. And so if you look at 4C, we're saying on either side, facing the green, on either side of Town Hall, we would ask for changing the zoning to add another story, but that story needs to be set back. And the reason being, there's a great deal of distance here that would basically be from building to building on either side of the green. And you're still going to be set back from that. And there's all a concern about not being taller than Town Hall. So I think if you do the math and study this, which I've done briefly, and I'd like to do more of it, I think we'd be okay if we added another story. And it certainly would make a little bit more viable economically, because it's a challenge to try and put together a lot of these parcels and to build on top of retail or to rebuild the retail with a new multi-story building. So those are challenging. All of that kind of project is dramatically difficult. So adding another level might make that a little bit more financially feasible. Okay, that's it. I want to move on and go to so this is pardon me for it's rather crude, but what I did was I counted all of the multifamily districts. And so all of these bubbles, these little outlines, are the areas that are A1 or they're industrial or they're business. That's going to be all of these districts that are being outlined here are multifamily to be locations for something that we can count towards MBTA. Obviously, when we get down into the town center, some of these areas will drop off if we're going to say no standalone. So the numbers would go down. So the thing that Gina was talking about, the obvious location of our first 25-acre contiguous parcel would be taking the Rosemary Ridge, these multiple parcels in here that are multifamily, and then take this industrial zone, which we would change to multifamily. So you can have 2 different zones, but they're contiguous across Hillside. And then there is this little strip, which is part of the parking lot for that office building that sits in the industrial district, but it's actually zoned single family. So our thought was, let's just wrap this and change that zone. And you could also bring the industrial down. So there are two choices there. So that chunk of stuff west of the tracks is 30 acres. So you're at your 25. And then if you zoom out to look at all of the heights, you actually have, you add up a lot of these parcels in here, and you're at 68 acres for this zone. So that's your 50 acres within that particular district. So that district would be okay. Again,
Oscar,
what
can you
we,
remind us of the rules? So you need to have over 50?
well, so it's not just 50, right? Because 50 times 15 is 750, and we have 1,784. So we need a couple of 50s, right?
Okay.
So we're not going to be done at 50. We're going to be done at, whatever. It's going to be 100 and something acres. So the numbers are 25 contiguous, and then the balance, and as we are. With the number of acres that we have around our transit, we have to have 90% of our units and 90% of our acreage within the half mile. And so basically everything from the heights down to town center, and even all the way down Chestnut, is all contiguous. So
Right.
we can pick and choose the areas, and we can skip some of the areas in the central business district if we choose not to have those standalone, and these might be opportunities for us to do other kinds of housing. So we're going to come up with a smorgasbord of things that you're going to hit the MBTA, check the box, and then other areas that we don't want to have, maybe be as of right, might have a little more control, or we might be able to target different kinds of housing. So different requirements for housing, or incentivize for other kinds of housing. So moving south, the town center is at 44, but you're counting a bunch of acres that would be not allowing standalone, so they would not get checked off for MBTA. The interesting thing about the junction is that it basically checks the box as another 25 acre. If you take literally everything south of the downtown, on the either side of Chestnut, you're at 22. And then if you take the Hartney Grandmont, which is essentially contiguous, and we were thinking we'd rezone that to keep it at 3 stories, make that apartment 1. So you're at 26. So you have another 25 acre contiguous already. So we have 2 to play with. And then we can add in some of the acreage up north in here. So in between, we have the area that Sudbury Farms is in, Bertucci's, going down to May as a zone that we would consider as changing to multifamily, or allowing multifamily. It's a business district. And then we have where the school administration building is, and there's some multifamily in here, or on Highland. And then we have the stuff that's around Greens Field, going down to 888 Great Plain and to the 2 churches. So these are little pockets where we would add in apartment 1. It's not a lot of acreage, but it picks up, Stephen Palmer picks up the Catholic Church, the school building, and it picks up some other little interesting areas that I forget what those are called. What were they? They were Pickering Place. If anyone knows that, I apologize if you're living there. But anyway, Pickering Place is this little area tucked in here. Again, these are areas that could be considered as multifamily, or being proposed as multifamily. I'm going to take any more time, and if anybody has questions about this, we're going to share this with everybody after tonight. It just got done today, so I apologize that you didn't get a chance to see this before. But if we did the first order of magnitude measurement, and it is carrying some of this stuff, there's another 15, 20 acres, 30 acres or so in here. So when we discount some of this, we'd have to take this number down. But curiously, when you add up all of that acreage, and that's all the stuff that would potentially be multifamily, zone multifamily as of right, you're at over 2,000 units. But it does include some of the stuff that we'd probably want to back off and go to standalone.
I think, Oscar, this is really great. And I think it'll be great to have a meeting that we go through it more in depth, because I think it's
Yeah.
It's incredibly detailed and super helpful. I'm very impressed. So, so thank you so much. I don't know, did I cut you off? Did you have
Nope.
anything else that you
No, we
wanted?
need to move on.
So I think Emily, I saw here that that you guys sent comments regarding suggested edits to implementation roadmap. So one question for Oscar and for the group is, were they based on, we saw that there was another one that just came out, you know, with the packet.
Karen,
Were these comments-
yes. Karen
Okay.
took it upon herself to, and you, Karen, you can speak for it, but yes, her version came out, which was her attempt to try and make it a little bit more targeted.
Yeah, there were just,
and
some of them could be
organized, so.
combined to, yeah, and that's,
Yeah, I basically changed the order and organization so that the strategies were organized by subgroup. So, you know, and that's, I think, how we're going to do it in the narrative that, you know, goes with, you know, the spreadsheet, is that, you know, we have similar types of strategies in specific sections. And so I didn't mess around a lot with the strategies at this point. I just, one comment related to Emily's comment is, I do think that there is some, you know, opportunities to group some of the strategies together. There, you know, there seem to be some, if not duplications, some similarities where they can be grouped together. So we don't have like 40 strategies or whatever. We have the key strategies together. I think there's opportunities to do that. And
I think, Emily, every one of your points was check the box, you know,
Thank you.
all good. The only thing I had a question about was the last one that you said you would recommend not doing the reduce or eliminate the preference, you know, local preference. What was your thought on that?
Well, can we, I'm sorry, I have to say I'm a little lost. If we can back up just a tiny bit, and I don't want to derail everybody. So we met, you know, whatever, in July, and there was a request for us to give you edits by August 17th. So our group came together and sent those edits along, right? And then another version came out earlier this week, which incorporated those edits because it was a lot shorter. Then I personally sent some comments on the reviewed vision, but not our whole group. So I'm just wondering, for this purpose of this meeting, did you want us to go through our comments on the original version that because we haven't, I'm just a little confused as to sort of what we're trying to do tonight.
well, I think the idea was, if any of the subgroups had any additional information that they wanted to present, that this was an opportunity. So clearly, that we
already sent them and we already reviewed
got
them.
this stuff. If you had something to add, that would be great, but you didn't, it's not a required, you know, deal.
It's not for any final edits before Karen starts putting all of this together into the plan, so that then we can review the plan as soon as that plan comes out, which is when, Karen? And Jean, I see your hand is up. That 1 second. I'll get to you in 1 second. Karen, when are you providing that?
Well, the meeting to discuss it is at the end of the month, so I've got to, you know,
hurry,
make haste.
So I guess I'm wondering, as just a point of like, so our group has not looked at the revised version.
Neither has our
group. Sent out the morning. It got sent out a couple of days ago. So either we should sit and do that as a group, or I guess we should wait until the end of September when you're sending us the whole thing. But we haven't had the opportunity to sit together and talk about it.
The revised spreadsheet is mostly an organizational thing.
It's a lot shorter though, and there's some word phrasing in there that's different. So, I mean, it's a different.
I took out things that were goals, that weren't actions. You know, there was a whole thing at the end that were just like goals, and just that didn't make sense. And the first three that were there initially, they're in other parts of the plan, but they're also kind of not specific actions. So I really just try to focus on the actions and reorganize them.
And I think, Emily, any comments that everyone has, as soon as Karen sends out the document, it can be incorporated in there. It's more of a guideline for her
So
to
for
be
the
able to
next,
do
for
it.
the next version, we'll
And-
take a look at it.
And I have to tell you that we looked at the old version because we hadn't been able to meet because I was out of town and everything. So we also haven't looked at it, but I think at this point, Karen has enough information to be able to put into the document, and it's going to be on us to all read the document and give her feedback. And I think
So-
that's where it comes from. This is just kind of a road.
Everything
fork.
Oscar said is comprised in like 2 or 3 rows of that document right now.
There's gonna be a
That's
whole
right.
narrative, so,
Right, but the implementation roadmap, what you just talked about is just really the 2 or 3 things that say amend this zoning and amend that zoning.
No.
Okay, so-
The implementation roadmap is every element of our housing plan working, the housing plan and implemented by subgroup. That was what Karen.
Can we
added.
maybe share the screen of the current
Sure.
one that was sent out this week?
Well, can I just, because I'm looking at time, can we give our comments really quickly and then we'll,
Yeah.
so why don't we do this? Jean, you've had your hand up for a while and you've been so patient. Do you have? Yeah, oh, you're on mute.
There,
Okay,
no. Okay, there we go.
we have you,
fully. At the beginning of, Oscar, of your presentation of the map that summarizes everything, which is really helpful, you said something about it that made me think you were saying we need to have 100+ acres. We only need to have 50 acres.
No, we don't, because 50 times 15 is only 750 units. Right, so you have to, the minimum is 50. But to get to 1784, you're gonna need multiples.
Oh, that's something I frankly hadn't thought about.
Yeah, the
Ah.
50 is the minimum, and then they actually, in the rewriting of the law, they backed that down. It said only in some towns, it's not gonna be a minimum of 50. Initially, they had kept that as a minimum, and it was, overwhelming some of the smaller communities. So they then added in the, of reasonable size.
So what you mean then, if you look at the appendix of the MBTA communities for Needham, a minimum land area is 50, but the minimum multifamily unit capacity is 1,784 units. So that's what we have to gear for.
Yeah.
That's what you mean? Okay,
Yeah,
thank
so
you for that
divide that
clarification.
by 15, and that'll give you your average, give you your acres.
I see.
So it's
I
simple.
really did misunderstand that. Okay.
A lot, yeah. Okay, so what I wanted to show is we went through and looked at all the capacity building. We're with the capacity building group. It's myself, Michael O'Brien, and Carol Fischetti, and I don't think that she's here tonight, but we went through and looked at the ones that I highlighted in gray from the original, from the July 28th, that including, inventory of town-owned land, integrate handicap accessibility and supportive services into new development, support the NHA initiative to upgrade all public housing conditions, update school master plan, study capacity of town resources, and study the public realm, the streetscape improvements and transit alternatives. And so those are the ones, and I know that there are the goals and all of this, which is what Emily was talking about. So what we did is we met and just had a couple of comments that I just like, and Michael jump in also. We a couple of just general comments. Do we need a specific line for workforce housing? Because there's a significant advantage of attracting younger workforce, for example, teachers. Something Carol was saying that some other suburbs are doing is creating affordable housing for workforce. That's especially in areas where we're finding trouble finding people, and diverse workforce. It would be really helpful. The MBTA communities regarding capacity. We need to review the density of housing around the stations and impact to each specific station. Not just, I think we have to target each one individually, because as Oscar was saying, they all have different, depending upon the location and depending upon the current zoning, they all have different conditions. And then are there opportunities for town-owned land to become housing? And this is something, I'm sorry, I went to the wrong one. Define reasonable density and as of right versus special permit, which we were talking before. And then number 3 was what we were talking about before that Lee said, it's really, we shouldn't be talking about this here. It should be more when it talks about a specific, when we change zoning in a specific place and then someone changes the project. I think it's talking about, we need to have a larger strategy, which is what Oscar was just bringing up. So we just went through this. Item 11 at the time was town-owned land. So zoning of town-owned land and business districts would need to change. And are there opportunities for town-owned land to become housing? And then town-owned land is owned by different entities. We showed that when we showed the capacity. So who would be able to review available land? I mean, so is it the select board? Is it because some land is owned by parks, some land is owned by the Needham Housing Authority, some land is owned by the schools, some land is, so if there is opportunity for land for housing, which entity would be able to grab all the groups together to be able to discuss it? No one wants to give up any of their land, but are there opportunities for this? I don't know.
The last time this was done, I want to say, I don't know, 15 years ago, there was a committee that was created that had representatives from all those different entities that control land. And then there was an inventory that was done. There was history that was put together on the restrictions that existed on those town parcels, with an idea of trying to identify if there was any surplus land in town that could be dedicated or converted over to housing. And you're right, nobody wanted to give up what they controlled. So
nobody wants to give up, but I know that there have been swaps because PPPC, I know there's a lot going on. I think it's getting everyone into one room and saying, there's a big master plan for, that PPPC did. There's a master plan that the school's doing. Like, we need to grab all the departments and say, what are the opportunities?
No, I think it makes sense. I think it makes sense, of course, to do it again. I think the attitude was different than about what people were willing to give up for housing than the perspective is now.
I think it goes hand in hand with the MBTA communities and with all these zoning changes. So I think it's critical. The other piece here, so we looked at integrating accessible and supportive housing for special need populations. Basically, we don't see any big town capacity increase with that integrating accessible and supportive housing. Supporting the NHA initiatives for new housing. So denser housing will increase town capacity. We don't know. One of the questions is about taxes, right? And so we don't know the tax structure of the NHA, because we were saying who we create denser housing, but would this increase property taxes, or would increased capacity be subsidized by others, right? So what, and then we don't know the tax structure of NHA. So in the sense of when you're creating capacity in the town, more capacity, who's paying for those services? Is it the new construction? Is it, so that's something that I think in general we need to think about is how that works, right? If we have to increase capacity of stormwater, the sewer or whatever, anything related to bigger changes in the town. And then diversifying the tax base, commercial, bringing more business to the community. That's how I think some of the town capacity is hopefully, at this point, when we diversify the tax base, is kind of dividing it up so that it's not just for the housing to increase the tax structure, but that it's shared with other uses. And then there's operating costs, which are incremental, but there are also capital costs. I have a lot of typos here, which are more significant. So when we think about taxes and we think about structuring everything and how capacity is going to be increased, we need to not only think about operating, but we also have to think about capital costs. And then, so how are those going to be subsidized, or how are those, how is that going to move forward? So we're looking at capacity, with a capacity lens. We were trying as best as we could, knowing that the other groups are looking at it with a different lens. And then Michael actually gave us an update on the school master plan. There are 2 conceptualized plans at the moment. There's a higher kindergarten population this fall than anticipated by 30 students, which is a big change. And there's a document in the fall that's going to provide new projections of the students at the schools. And so we're trying to figure out the increase of students, right? Is it due to new construction? Are they new to town? Is it coming from private programs after COVID? So the plan is in place, but it's not fully approved. And the school capacity changes is going to continue to change for the economy, the pandemic and all of that. So Michael, I don't know if you want to add any information to that.
No, I think that you mentioned it sort of well, Natasha, and that we'll continue to get more demographic information this fall and see how that trends from this year, sort of would that perhaps impact what forecasts had been that we'd seen sort of 15-year projections already out. So all set
So
there.
that's pretty critical because I know that the schools have a lot. I see Jean and Oscar have their hands up. Jean, do you want to go first? You're on mute.
Actually, I thought I hadn't lowered my hand before, but actually I do have a question. Your discussion of town capacity is under item 19, support NHA and initiatives for new housing. So all of these questions about capacity are related to the extent to which NHA housing units or new NHA housing
No,
units
we
have a
started talking
burden.
about, the tax structure of it, like who's, if we have to create capacity or we're creating capacity for NHA. So I guess maybe this shouldn't be here. This should be somewhere else. It just became, it opened up the conversation to understand if we're increasing capacity for NHA or we're increasing capacity per zoning. Is it going to increase, how do we increase capacity of services in town? And who's paying for it and where is this coming from and what's structured for NHA now and what is going to be structured moving forward for, who's paying for this and how are we doing it? And so
okay.
it just kind of opened up the conversation, not necessarily that we're saying, it's all about NHA. It's just kind of it opened up kind of a discussion, which I thought was really productive about thinking about capacity and how, how do we increase capacity and how is it subsidized or not subsidized or paid for? And how do we create a diversified tax base to help us pay for these things that will benefit, the entire town?
Okay. I just want to make sure that it wasn't entirely focused on NHA. That's all. Okay, thanks.
No. It's and Oscar, it looks like you.
Well, I'd say that in the MBTA guideline document, they do not account for, and they don't expect that we account for the infrastructure impacts, that it's neutral, because this is again zoning that's to allow for the projects to go forward. And so therefore projects would be dealing with any kind of impact on the infrastructure surrounding them, like Muzzy, if they're going to have to update or upgrade the capacities for their particular site, that would happen on the project. But that said, there are probably some smaller kinds of projects that would be burdened by the capacity. So I think maybe we do need to think as again, kind of broadly where we see our infrastructure reaching or having issues with capacity, or whether and getting a comfort as to knowing where we think we will need to keep an eye on adding capacity down the road, or where we think we have plenty of capacity going forward to accommodate the added density from MBTA projects and from any other projects that come online. But I do think the MBTA is not expecting that we're dealing with that question, because it's going to happen on an incremental basis with projects, and they're going to pay for their infrastructure impacts. Right.
Yeah, for example, like, there were concerns last night at the planning board meeting with the Muzzy side of other, capacity of sewer and things on other, because they've been having issues. Well, that project is going to do its own thing, but there are already capacity issues in some of the older areas of town. And so if we're adding new, then it's just kind of a bigger picture of what are we impacting and who's paying for these infrastructure changes that are not deferred maintenance. They're actually new additional, requirements based on new capacity.
Yeah, I think it would be great to just understand, if we take this map that we just walked through and looked at the entire corridor and said, okay, now you add 1,700 units and they're going to be sprinkled down these various streets. tell us, get the, sit down with buildings and grounds, or sit down with our team in town and understand from our buildings and grounds guys if there are any areas that we know we should be flagging for needing, that will need.
That need to be
capacity.
upgraded, right? So which
Yeah.
areas need to be upgraded? What's part of
Yeah.
deferred maintenance? What's part of new capital,
Yeah.
costs?
And then start
And-
planning.
And start planning for that, because I think it's irresponsible for us to say we want to change the zoning and add 1,700 units without understanding the impact to the schools, without understanding the
Yeah.
impact to our infrastructure. And there's some things that are affected more than others, right? And
And-
so those are the ones that we really need to look at. So
I had a question for Michael. So I know that, when was that meeting? March or something, when then the presentation of the master plan for the schools, to select board and,
Yes,
And
it was in the
was-
spring. Yeah.
yeah, spring, thank you, March 3rd or 4th. But, when that question, when Marianne Cooley asked the question, have you guys considered that the MBTA, the impact of the MBTA communities adding families with children, blah, blah, blah. Was that counted in? And I think whoever was speaking said no. So I think part of it, my question is that something that you guys are going to be trying to get a handle on and make some projections about those impacts?
Good question. Yes, it will need to be incorporated into, I think, now that we have reduced sort of some conceptualized plans down to what is now sort of two, that probably will get factored in absolutely to seeing how that would be a factor. And also too is sort of sharing with this year that we happen to have a larger kindergarten base that we weren't anticipating. We were able to accommodate all. Is this just going to be an outlier, or will we see this as a trend with and sort of getting a better sense of, are more families just continuing to move in? If we have multi unit complexes, how will that impact? Absolutely. It would probably take time to sort of just continue to revisit and think about these things and what projections could look like for enrollment.
And we also talked about the next one, which is ADUs, right? So the ADUs, they don't necessarily, because they're smaller, don't necessarily increase the capacity as much as a new development. But when we're looking at the workforce housing could be teachers. If it's teachers, they might bring their families with them. It could be other people working in town, people that could be working at French Press, or could be working at Basil, or whoever, who might bring their families as well. So it's understanding from other towns, maybe, or doing research, or I don't know what percentage increases the schools versus others. And I mean, by sitting on PPBC, understanding the school master plan, understanding our, capital projects that are occurring, the schools, some of them need a lot of work, and there isn't a lot of town land for the types of schools that are required to be built, so that we can get, MSCBA to give us money to help us with them and things like that. So it's very complicated. And I think it's something that really needs to be reviewed, the type of housing that we have and how that impacts, especially the schools, but then also any other infrastructure pieces that we just need to plan for. It's not that all of this can't happen. It's just, how does it integrate into all the different plans that are occurring simultaneously, especially the schools? And so then the other one is the public realm improvements, including streetscape and traffic. And Carol said that there's the traffic parking study is being done by the town. And we were wondering, is it pre-COVID versus post-COVID? So if there's a parking study to understand how that impacts some of the goals and suggestions that were there about especially the two lots, the Hersey lot, and then also the town center lot. So this is where we got to. So just some more additional information that, that we were able to talk a little bit about capacity based on it. I haven't looked at the new one up close, but I think, Karen, if I understand this correctly, it feels like you've gotten enough feedback from us to start putting everything together, to send us something for our comments by the end of the month. And it's going to be a big document, and we appreciate all the work you're doing, but I think it's critical that everyone reviews it with, overall overarching, but then also
Absolutely.
with their groups, more detailed information, so that we can get a really strong document.
Absolutely.
And with that, I think, if anyone has any comments, I would encourage, additional comments, or if you, I would encourage everyone to send an email to the group, and then let's let Karen do her work, and then we'll have plenty of time to comment, and then have community comments as well. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Lee for next steps.
Okay, so just briefly, I think so. We have a meeting on September the 29th, and that's when Karen will have the draft plan available. And I think we'll talk about the presentation for the community meeting, which is planned for October the 12th. So October 11th will be the presentation of the draft housing plan to the select board and the planning board. October 12th will be the community-wide meeting. And I think now we're also talking, and as I'm talking about the community meeting, I think we should probably have a conversation about how we want to run that meeting and make a decision as a group. Now, we know we've been meeting by Zoom, and the last community meeting we did was by Zoom. What's the group's, feeling? Do we want to move to a hybrid meeting and do the community meeting through that format, or do you want to stick to a strict Zoom format?
Lee,
Yes.
one thing quick. I think you said the community meeting is October 12th. You meant to say October 13th.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes,
Yeah.
I meant to say October 13th. I'm sorry.
And I'll respond to your question about the community meeting. I think it should be in person. But-
Okay, is that the consensus of the group? Karen, I think Karen will
I
be
think it can
remote.
be hybrid, Jean, though, right? I mean, for those that can't attend but really want to be able to.
I'd agree for
like to
hybrid
be
as
there in
well.
person,
Yeah,
but I
it can be hybrid. Yes, of course, hybrid.
Whatever works for those. Zoom in person, that would be great.
Okay, good. Then we'll plan on doing a hybrid meeting on the 13th. And then I think, we hope to bring the, have a final meeting probably, I think around November the 17th, to talk about any changes we want to make to the plan as a result of what we heard at the community meeting, and to bring, I think, the recommendations of this group to a conclusion. And of course, Oscar we had mentioned this additional planning meeting to kind of go over the details that Oscar has been working on so diligently. So it would be helpful, I think, for Alex and I, if those who are interested in participating in that effort, if you could let us know by email sometime, early tomorrow or early next week, so we can get a date on the calendar that will work for everybody.
And that's why I had my hand up. Thank you, Lee.
Oh, okay, that's
That
why
was-
it's up. I wasn't gonna forget you, believe me.
No, that was my question, and you thank you for asking.
Okay, so is there any other new business? Jean, it looks like you're on mute.
What is the date for the November meeting? What did you say?
Right, the 17th.
17th. Okay, thank you.
And we don't have an invite for that, so we need to put it in, right? Okay. Any other items? Well,
Just flagging, Natasha, this might affect you, that the next September meeting is also the back to school night, at least at the Needham High School. So
29th.
and I'm
some of us
actually,
might be late or.
yeah, and I'm actually, to tell you, I'm out of town. Unfortunately, I'm at a conference in California that day, so I'll be calling from there. But yeah, so does I guess the question is that still a good date, or should we change that date?
I think it'd be great if we could change it.
I don't know if we have, I don't know how many people have conflicts or, would be showing up late.
Yeah. If we make it earlier, it's not enough time to get the plan ready. Probably.
How many people do we need for quorum?
Yeah, but it's an important meeting. We need.
Or could we move it back just one day? Does that help if we did it I don't know how people's schedule looks for the 28th.
Yeah, that's better. I mean, if that works for Natasha, does it?
Let me, hold on one second. I mean, I'm, on-
Doesn't work for me.
it doesn't work for
I
you.
have a
It
conflict.
doesn't.
Okay,
Hmm,
sorry.
hmm.
Well.
I could
Bill-
check though, because they actually wanted the meeting on the 29th, and I said, no, I can't do it because I have a conflict. So I could just double check to make sure that they haven't scheduled it and see if the 29th can work and let people know, but I don't know how useful that is right now to our conversation. But
I mean, I could do the, oh, so you can't do the 28th?
How about Tuesday, October 4th?
We're getting
Is
awful,
that-
I think we're getting awful close to the community meeting and our meeting with the select board.
Yeah,
it
yeah.
May
And
also be the
also, we
night of
didn't
Yom
schedule our
Kippur.
planning board meeting that night because I think it's Yom
Yom
Kippur.
Kippur. Yeah, it's the start of Yom Kippur.
It was
Oh.
a holiday. Okay, thank
That's bad too. That's why we moved our planning board meeting then. Okay. Well, I don't know.
Well, if we'll have a chance to review the draft, at least a day or two before, then those of us who can't make it will submit our comments.
Yeah, that can be
Yeah,
done,
let's just
sure.
keep it and maybe partial, and it'll be recorded so people can hear also and send comments. I don't know if I can make it either. I'm gonna try my best. So. Okay, I
Okay.
think it's gonna be tough, and I think we had. I don't know if she probably, I hear a sigh of relief from her not to have to revise it, right? Let's just let it be. I feel like there's a lot of communication with this group. So we can.
Yeah, I want to be careful also to make sure all of our deliberations and decision-making are made at public meetings. And that communication is with our staff, who then decide what needs to be sent out to everyone. Particularly, I want to avoid a kind of back and forth that's outside of a meeting. So we stay within the open meeting law.
Okay. So with that, I think if no one else has any comments, is there a motion to close the meeting?
So moved.
Second,
who was second?
And do we
Marcus.
have, and so do we have to
Marcus.
take a roll call, Lee, or Jean?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay, so I'm just gonna go through whoever's, the order that we're in. Jean McKnight,
yes.
Marcus Nelson,
yes.
Rhonda Spector,
Yes.
Oscar Mertz,
Yes.
Karen Sonnerberg.
I'm not a voter.
Oh, okay. Helen Gregory,
Yes.
but you're on my screen, so I have to. Ed Cosgrove, Michael O'Brien,
Yes.
Heidi Frail,
Yes.
Emily Cooper,
Yes.
Ed Cosgrove. Do we need everyone, or?
We've got a majority,
quorum, right?
supermajority voting, so maybe
And-
it is.
Anaya's co-chair is an aye, so thank you all. Looking forward to seeing what Karen puts together. No pressure, Karen. And got a lot of opinions around here. Looking forward to the map meeting with Oscar, and it's a lot of great work. And thank you all. And Jean, thank you for going through the MBTA communities, because that is a lot of information hot off the press, and you're great at
Yeah.
distilling it
And
for all of us.
I still emphasize that there are ambiguities that somehow we have to resolve with the DHCDs.
Great. Okay, good night, everyone. Thank you so
Night,
much.
everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.